Time to lure people into the grind. Hello everyone, one and all. I am Sci-Fi Freak. But those old already know of me, so before we move into the topic of this production, let me introduce myself to those new to my channel, or Warframe in general. Those familiar to my presence know me as the Limbo Guy, the Floridian who mains the Dancer of Realms, creator of the Limb Bible, and the go-to guy to understanding the Riftwalker. But I also am one to experiment with this glorious sandbox and create videos around topics or weapons that interest me at that time, which leads into the title itself, Warframe Reviews and what this one will entail. Before I even joined Warframe and got involved with this community, I had seen many reviews floating around the internet. Some great, some mediocre, with one of my favorites being from the YouTuber Skillup, which I feel still holds up despite the age. Jesus Christ, that was 7 years ago. As a Warframe player, I always envisioned giving my opinions and takes on this game. But unlike most of the other creators or players I see giving their thoughts 20, 50, even 200 hours after playing, I knew deep down that I shouldn't divulge any views on Warframe until I had enough time to marinate in this world and what it has to offer. So here I am, 4,000 hours of playtime across multiple devices, ready to let it all out. Well, kinda. You see, I want this review to target new or returning players more than experienced ones, so absolutely zero story spoilers in this review, minus its introduction for the purposes of defining the game's mechanical pillars, and setting aside some visual spoilers for the game's locations and factions for the purposes of this review. Treat this less as the review, and more of an appetizer for a full in-depth breakdown in the future. Mainly because I already have multiple big projects on my plate right now, and I don't want to take too much attention away from them. It should also be noted that what I talk about here isn't in any particular order, but will have dedicated chapters in the description if you wish to skip some of my ramblings. Speaking of ramblings, let me cease them and move on to this review. Starting with, well, what is Warframe from an eagle-eye view?
They choose. No purpose.
Online discourse will tell you that Warframe is a generic action MMO experience developed by Digital Extremes in 2013 with a closed beta experience in 2012. A game that evolved from a stealth action shooter based on the original concept for a previous game, Dark Sector. A game that has its own story to tell. If you would like a greater understanding of Dark Sector's influence, I would recommend the Warframe documentary from NoClip to lighten your vision of the situation. However, those keen in sight and mind will notice that the game doesn't reflect a methodical state of gameplay like most other MMOs, and instead embodies a laid-back, less involved combat loop, centered around turning your enemies into fumes. Horde shooters have been around for years, with Warframe simply being the latest and greatest in a long line of creations from developers past, with a vast army of Warframes and weapons to call the Origin system. But to understand how these elements feed into each other, we need to turn back time to the very beginning of Warframe's story, and examine its introduction. After a rather glorious cutscene that makes the upfront lore of Warframe digestible, we are awakened by our guide the Lotus in the midst of a kidnapping at the hands of the Grineer's current big bad, Captain Vor, a rotting creature who desires us for rather nefarious deeds. Before we can go beat him up, we are given the opportunity to choose one of the three Warframes in the introduction, Excalibur, Mag, and Volt. Excalibur is Warframe's poster boy, and it's the safest choice of the three, having access to 4 abilities centered around melee, and a passive that boosts specific melee weapon types. This aspect of having 4 abilities and 1 passive is pretty standard for 90% of Warframes you will find on your journey. Some having twists on this formula through tap and hold functions, or some having abilities or functions only available when conditions of abilities take place. Sadly, Excalibur doesn't really have these, but he is the first Warframe players will come across with what is known as an Exalted Weapon. Exalted weapons are basically weapons summoned through abilities that are completely unique to the frame. In Excalibur's case, Exalted Blade summons a curved sword of pure light that unleashes energy waves with each swing. Pretty cool, if a bit mediocre in comparison to the various Exalted weapons that exist later on. From the dual pistol goddess Mesa and her regulators, to the beatdown at the hands of Wukong and his iron staff. But what if one desired a more weapons-focused approach to gameplay, with abilities to amplify your damage and survival? Well, Mag has such a bubbly personality. Mag is the first of the synergy-focused characters I mentioned earlier, with a streamlined focus on buffing her damage of the arsenal she carries, mainly through her second ability, Magnetize, grouping enemies together and amplifying projectile weapons like rifles, with abilities that synergize with her Magnetize. For example, her first ability, Pull, is great for grouping like her two, Magnetize, but unlike Magnetize, it has to be cast on an enemy to spawn. Pull can pull enemies from anywhere in its radius at a further range, so you could stand in or near a magnetized bubble and pull new enemies into it instead of spawning a new Magnetize, this being just one example of her synergistic potential. Synergy-heavy characters are a bit rarer in Warframe's arsenal, with the most notable examples being Warframes like Equinox and Limbo. Frames are mainly gun platforms who employ abilities that aid in DPS and survivability. But should that kind of gameplay discourage you, there is one other type of character we meet that fills the DPS caster role in Warframe: Volt, the Electric Speedster. Volt is in ways a combination of the philosophies explored in Excalibur Mag, caster and platform at the same time. Shock and discharge being the DPS, and speed and his shield being the platform/utility aspects of his kit, allowing the user to lean into either of these aspects to produce the user's most engaging playstyle. Not much to say in regards to his playstyle. He is very straightforward and strong at the same time, with Volt's gameplay philosophy being the most dominant in Warframe, notable examples being Ember and Rhino, both leaning on opposite sides of the spectrum, but both being relatively easy to grasp and command. He can be a nuke, he can be a defensive utility platform. Upon making your choice, the Lotus whispers to us once again, overloading our power systems and compels us to slaughter the Grineer brutes, teaching the player various ability casts and commands before exiting the shrine in a linear segment. We gain access to our first ever weapons to utilize in Warframe: the Bratton, Paris, Leto, Kunai, Skana, and Bow, each embodying one of the three possible weapon classes: primary, secondary, and melee. However, are paramount to getting the user acclimated to the different weapon types as well. Warframe is at its core a sandbox, with the starter Warframes leaning into this fact. Further reflected in these weapons, they are not simple reskins, but have individual stats that go for the base damage of the weapon, to the types of behaviors they exhibit, like the Bratton's projectile-based values, to the late-game room-clearing amalgamations like the Amprex chaining beams, to unique weapons with modifiers when conditions are met, like the Caratino's Claw weapon getting extended range after a period of time after hitting 12 combo. There is a weapon and frame for any playstyle you can think of. But it is extremely limited. For now, of course, since this is the tutorial. While collecting these weapons, and hearing the Moldy Cauliflower spout some threats, the game will introduce these movement segments for you. Without getting hyperbolic, this game's movement is the most important mechanic, second only to modding, which we will discuss later. Parkour is the foundation of Warframe's traversal and combat, that it defines a novice from an Einstein, going from dead sprints that are sluggish and mind-numbing, to an aerial terror that would make the Geneva Congestion stutter through the use of bullet jumping and changing directions mid-aim glide. Practice these aspects and you too will dominate. After failing our confrontation with Captain Vor, we are introduced to our second main character, Ordis, the ship Cephalon, aka AI but not AI, leading us to defend our old ship over a period of time, and once done, we make our escape.
It is superior to theirs. Perhaps there are systems left in the orbiter compartment?
Look at this mess.
Those savages. Components have been removed. The lower orbiter compartments have no life support. Why did the operator abandon me?
Finding ourselves on board the Orbiter, our base of operations, and where half of your time in the game is going to take place. Making our way to the arsenal, we get a look at our glorious Warframe, our elegant weaponry, and
In whatever mission they choose.
all these things cost platinum. What's this? Jesus Christ. Okay, before you click off, it's not exactly what you think. There is a vast array of weapons and warframes for the taking, but at a glance they are all paywalled. Don't worry about this isn't the case. In fact, many weapons can only be unlocked and are not purchasable within the store, so patience is key, for how will be rewarded later. We continue on the Vor's Prize quest, and as we play, we do some random tasks akin to hacking, and optimally, delete a reactor from existence, in order to unlock more segments of our ship. The store console, for example, allows the user to buy most in-game cosmetics, weapons, decorations, even the premium currency platinum itself, in a segregated, optional manner. You don't need to interact with the story if you don't want to, and it is never in your face as you play. The Foundry, a mainstay for crafting your weapons, warframes, and various other components necessary for you to complete your journey. I mean, how else will you get rid of the Sicaris burrowing?
It's your mind!
And now, we continue— oh, I see. Found the modding screen, eh? Modding in Warframe is about 60%, sometimes 70% of what makes your builds work in Warframe. Mods utilized in this artistry are acquired in various ways, but primarily as drops from specific enemies or rewards from missions, with rare cases being from vendors throughout your journey. And how do you use these? Well, exact details would take an hour, maybe two to go over, but to keep it short and easy, here is what's most important. Mods are upgrades for the frames and weapons you acquire, with different mods being exclusive to said frames or weapons. Take Serration for example. It's exclusive to the rifle class of weapons and cannot be placed on secondaries or melees, meaning you need their respective mods, Hornet Strike and Pressure Point. The majority of mods are displayed in percentages, so say you have a mod that increases a weapon's damage by 100%, with the damage at base being 50. That damage is increased by 100%, making the damage double to 100. This, however, does not take into account the critical multiplier though. So say you have a 25% critical chance with a 2 times multiplier, meaning that on average, 1 out of 4 shots will crit. This being 200 damage when it does, 100 when it does not. This extends to every set in Warframe as well. Critical chance, HP, shields, range for AoE weapons or Warframe abilities. If you want to upgrade it, a mod exists for it. And as you go deeper in the Warframe, you will unlock mods and upgrades that not only boost multiple stats at once, but even unlock entire mechanics, with the combination of mods and stats prioritized, creating unique interactions and playstyles. Let me explain. Take a look at the shield stat. It has a mechanic called shield gating, where when shields break, you are granted a temporary invincibility period that scales with the amount of shields lost before breaking, up to a limit. And once shields are fully recharged, you get your maximum gate duration again, with this shield recharge being on a 1 second delay. So how do you get them back quickly? Well, you can stack 2 recharge delay mods called Fast Deflection and Vigilante Vigor. When combined, our shield recharge and recharge delay on Limbo Prime here go from 33 shields per second with a 1 second delay to 88 shields per second with a 0.2 second delay. This is significant against lower level units and makes it easy to constantly regen shields. However, higher level units will damage so fast that it's harder to regain shields, especially when a damage over time effect is on you as well. But what if there was a way to give us an extended gate while letting the shields recharge their full amount during that time? Rolling Guard is a mod that at max rank, on roll, gain 3 seconds of immunity and remove all status effects. When applied to our setup, we technically get 4 seconds of invincibility, with our shields regenerating back to full within 3 of these seconds. This is just one small example, but the idea should be understood. Warframe's modding system rewards your understanding of the different stats, damage types, and mechanics, with an infinite number of combinations available. The only limit is your knowledge and imagination. And you should be able to start very soon, since a handful of important mods are gained just by doing the Vor's Prize quest. Speaking of which, after crafting the doohickey to disable Vor's explosive, and failing, we managed to find him, confront him in a somewhat decent boss fight, and after killing him, get a nice talk from the Lotus, and yeah, that's it. You're on your own now. And this prompts our return to the clusterfuck that is the star chart. After the intro crest, Warframe takes a do whatever you want approach from here, giving some guidance but not enough to really know what to do or where to go. Outside of the quests that you need to complete, but there is one defining indicator you will eventually find: the junctions. Junctions are the means of travel between planets in Warframe, tightly guarded by Knights of the Rails, who are Warframes themselves. Completing one will unlock a new planet, resources, weapons, and in some cases a new quest. But before that, you have to meet the prerequisites to face these foes. Now, the challenges have been scaled back over the years, but there are two that remain consistent: killing the world's boss, or completing a specific mission type. The world's respective boss fights are pretty unique, and in fact a large majority are pretty well designed in their own right. But they hold importance to the player for one important reason: their loot system. Take the Jackal boss on Venus, an explosive multi-phase dodge fest that teaches you various mechanics you will use in later encounters, but upon defeat will drop one of 3 blueprints for the Rhino Warframe, in your optics, chassis, and systems, with his main blueprint purchasable from the market for credits. You will have to replay this boss at minimum 3 times to get each component, with each component taking 12 hours to craft, rushable for platinum, and taking 72 hours to build Rhino. But as of the Techcraw Encore update, this will be lowered to 24 hours. This is where we hit the first real hurdle of Warframe investment. Warframe's weapons and Warframe blueprints are the free means of acquiring these items, and due to this players are forced to sit out and do something else until their items finish crafting. Now in late game where you will have a large arsenal, this isn't much of a problem, but in early game it can be a huge turnoff, which they have been slowly rectifying, especially with its second problem, the slot system. Warframe has 59 Warframes and hundreds of weapons, but only 2 frame slots, and the only 2 ways to realistically expand them is paying platinum or engaging with Warframe's Battle Pass system for these slots, which thankfully there's only one tier and it is completely free. And by this point you should already be MR1, possibly 2, and you might be wondering, what was that challenge? That was nothing.
A formidable performance. This test is now complete.
And now I get a cool badge.
Mission complete. Excellent work, Tenno.
It's very deceiving, but MR is one of, if not the most important system this game has to offer. Your mastery rank is a leveling system tied to the number of items you level up, and the mission nodes you complete in Warframe. Completing a node grants experience that goes to the next level, and leveling any weapon, frame, or other items to level 30 will also go to this level, but only on the first time doing so. And it is very important to do this because your MR determines what weapons you can use, as well as other factors like the amount of standing can be obtained in Warframe's factions per day, which can be used to buy other weapons and Warframes from these factions. But it is very important to hit at minimum mastery rank 2 for the sole purpose of accessing Warframe's in-game trading system. The one thing that defines the free-to-play experience, and is the free means of going from rags to riches. Warframe's monetization is an integral part of how this game makes money, and there are 2 means of which the developers go about this. The first is to purchase a platinum on the in-game market that can be utilized to purchase nearly every weapon, Warframe, crafting resource, and cosmetic within Warframe. Obviously, there are a few that can be crafted or purchased for credits at in-game events, but if you see something you want, usually you go pop open that wallet. But the game advertises itself as a fully free-to-play experience. How do you get these without purchasing plat for money? That's where the in-game trading system comes in. Warframe's trading system has been mined in millions of players' Hail Marys for years. As it stands, players in this game do desire certain Warframe parts, components, mods, you get the idea. Say I have a desirable mod for 15 platinum. This value being arbitrarily decided by the player base. I go to the in-game trade chat and post want to sell bleebley-blop for 15 platinum. Someone will contact me in-game and will tell me if they want it or want a new deal. Once we accept, we go to a location in-game that allows trading and make the trade. He has my mod, I have his platinum. Now I move on to another item if I have one to sell, and repeat until I run out of trades per day, determined by my mastery rank. Trading may not be one's favorite thing to do, but it is the only way to gain platinum for free, and given how fast in-game actions and upgrades become through it, it's no surprise DE has been doing as well as they have from a monetary standpoint. But there's the second monetization system that is equally as important, that which is almost completely untradeable and almost completely locked behind a paywall. The Prime Access System. Every 3 months, Digital Extremes adds in one new Warframe to the roster, with the upcoming Warframe Temple being the 60th frame in question. But over time, DE will introduce a Prime variant of a Warframe. In lore, this is a if the ore can beautify this frame. From a monetary standpoint, it's a way for DE to redesign the look of an older frame and a selection of weapons alongside it, with entirely new cosmetics, while still making money in a Founders Pack style. And these packs are not cheap either, some going as high as 140 USD, roughly 2 AAA games, with at least half of its price coming from the loot boosters and platinum tucked into it, which at a glance does come off as unfair to those not in the know. Awesome looking characters for hundreds of dollars that are mostly cosmetic in nature? Well, you would be right, until you discover the ludicrous nature of Warframe relics. Relics are the free means of gaining prime components for frames and weapons. Every relic has 3 tiers of item, 3 common, 2 uncommon, and 1 rare part, each with different chances of dropping, which can be found outside of the game on Warframe's wiki page for that item. And the way you claim these items within is through Void Fissures, in the art of relic cracking. Void Fissures are a mission type, one will unlock as they clear various nodes on a planet. When a fissure is active, a player will be restricted to a specific relic tier. Upon selecting a relic you desire, you have the option to upgrade it with Void Traces, a resource you obtain by opening other relics in general. These upgrades will increase your odds of gaining a rarer reward, and for rarer tiers this becomes borderline mandatory to exploit. After your choice of relic, you simply run the mission and collect a resource called Reactive from slain enemies, highlighted by Void Corruption. Once you have 10, complete the mission. If solo, you will just claim the item, but if in a squad, you're given a choice to also claim rewards someone else earned, with no downside to you or that player in question. And what makes this even cooler is that these same parts and relics can be sold to other players for plat if desired, another option to gain premium currency. Warframe's monetization on the surface can seem rather egregious, but when you decide to invest and work with other players for platinum, it's honestly not that bad as a whole. I mean, I myself wouldn't have the majority of upgrades and cosmetics I have if I hadn't engaged in the system a little bit. But there is one big issue that those like myself and most astute among you may come to. What if they use this desire for specific upgrades to manipulate and undoubtedly drive up the prices of various upgrades? Well, it is already happening. Kind of. To think the devs don't know this can happen is kind of ignorant in my humble opinion, and I don't exactly blame them. I mean, they gotta get those Canadian dollars somehow. So they don't just develop more desirable upgrades, but Warframe's content creators they are partnered with help enforce these ideals within the player base. Someone to go to learn something, when they themselves don't understand much themselves.
We have A tier. Kurlevo, Protea. Is that Volt?
That their favorite Warframe isn't ranked higher.
Oh, right.
A large majority of Warframe's content creators are, frankly, uninspired. People who aspire to give you something to feast upon, while that information itself is usually incorrect, regurgitated nonsense everyone with 2 brain cells could see. Take a look at these 3 content creators. Tell me what differences can you spot.
Limbo. Okay. Or no, Loki. Loki. Yeah. Because Limbo's right here. So D tier is Loki, Caliban, and Inaros.
Build. And is this amazing? For this week, yeah, maybe. It might be the best thing this week. There's an argument to be had there, like realistically.
Have a small radius.
They need to physically touch they need to clothesline themselves so they can get affected by this. Group a
Last but
small
not least, you have
radius.
D tier with
is
Limbo.
They need to physically
Okay,
touch the,
there's
they
no
need
Loki.
to clothesline
For this week,
themselves so
Loki.
they can get
Yeah,
affected
maybe.
by
It
this.
might be the
Limbo.
best.
They talk about the same stuff, talk the same way, record the same way, have similar formats, like there is almost nothing unique about them. Well, what about this Gas TV guy? He seems to be talking about
moving them. So is there hope that they're going to, like, they're going to have to, he used the word nerf. I mean, these are all design decisions by the person that's going to be reducing the power here. So I am a little bit annoyed by this.
Bro, that was disruptive to the game and sucked. Quit whining like a little man-child, dude. Warframe's content creation space has always been a fickle subject from the moment I started to share my voice. The biggest creators mostly record themselves ranting about a subject that boils down to, it's not meta enough, or I don't like/understand it, so it's bad, leaving smaller creators like myself and many others to pick up the scraps and investigate these topics properly. I mean, in my character's Limbo's case, his most basic mechanics gets overlooked or not explained by most creators, despite these mechanics easily being testable in-game, or found in Warframe's official wiki page, which I went through the effort of updating after not being touched for nearly 3 years. However, I do have to emphasize that this does not mean every creator carries this level of ignorance or laziness. Not at all. Some big boys follow this code of, I guess, identity pretty well. Flowman, for example, is a South African gigachad with a pretty strict code of testing frames extensively, several hours at a time, I must say. And if he needs help, he asks. And if he hasn't tried something enough to properly discuss it, he keeps his yap shut and doesn't act like the all-knowing.
It's good, but it did work for me. I don't have much more to say about him because I don't know much about him. I will give him a B tier only because I don't know him enough. If I dived into his mechanics more, maybe I might change it to an...
Then we have creator friends of mine, Sabuchi and Triburos, artisans of Warframe, who take their unique voice and apply it to a completely random topic. I mean, watch a second of any Sabuchi video and you will love or hate him for it.
So, voice actors are kinda crazy. For every immediately recognizable Yuri Lowenthal performance either being Yosuke or gruff Yosuke, sometimes you'll find a range that throws you for a complete loop. Like this guy, Stalker, the same person that voices...
Oh, hey, babe.
And Triburos, in my eyes, is a role model for creators to aspire to. Maximum effort into everything he does on his channel, while discussing a topic he has his own interests in, while being unafraid to say when he likes or dislikes something, while remaining humble and lighthearted, and most importantly, is a fellow Floridian. Then we have creators in the middle of the pack, like my buddy Cool Kid, a well-spoken and intelligent Warframe player who will discuss anything and everything involving Warframe, from Warframe's various exalted weapons to finding out the highest possible bullet jump. The dude isn't afraid to explore what on the surface is a simple concept, while step by step explaining how he reached these conclusions. And you have the smaller creators trying to have their voices heard in regards to select Warframes. I myself fall under this category of creator, where we pick up the criticisms of particular Warframes, then explore and or explain why these criticisms come to be. In my case, I just got exhausted of seeing people call Limbo dogshit, when from an experienced eye, I can clearly tell these high-tier slop crafters didn't do their research at all. Watch any video regarding Limbo from the big three, and none of them will tell you about Banish's hold function, which is important for his third ability, the function as well, overlooking what is the single most important function of his entire kit, because they didn't want to do 5 minutes of testing, leading me to believe they are only doing this for the money and views with zero desire for accuracy and quality. Then there's legends like Animalistic, the Rhino main, a creator, no, a friend, who explores Rhino's interactions with Warframe Sandbox, maybe Roar's interaction with abilities like Thermal Sunder and how it breaks the game, down to unexpected mechanics like Rhino's Charge and Momentum, showcasing this frame as more than its invincibility provided by Ironskin, or creators like Professor Dystopia, the Vauban man, and the person who single-handedly changed my mind about Vauban, an impressive feat given how people by nature are hard to sway. All of what I have said, barely scratching the surface of what the space has to offer. All you have to do is find it, which sadly seems to be an impossibility for most players and creators alike. They just want everything handed over on a plate, with no desire to think or craft things for themselves, which, sadly, is something DE seems to be paying attention to, and, disturbingly, has led to design decisions tailored towards those of a lesser intelligence. Till this point, Warframe has been shown in a mostly positive light, with explanations regarding its early game as intended. However, from this point onwards, there will be some minor spoilers for specific enemies and mechanics you will encounter, so beware my words. Warframe frankly is a design disaster. Well, not entirely. Warframe has what can be described as a feature creep problem, where new things constantly get introduced to the game, then quickly being forgotten as the game moves along. Take stealth for instance. It was a core part of Warframe's early days, because the game was far slower back then, being more methodical, heavy utilization of critical thinking, and was, well, hard. Enemies hit hard and were harder to kill, but through stealth attacks and mechanics, survival was made easier and was by definition engaging. However, as movement was revamped and enemies became weaker and weaker, the desire for stealth and finishers became rarer and rarer, minus a few boss fights and some friends who rely on it to stay alive. This of course only one example in a sea of repeated instances, but goes to show how DE approaches their game design. Stuff continues to get added, without any tune-ups or additions to improve these older mechanics, or when they do happen, they come several years later, such as the case with a mod I previously reviewed on the channel, Primary Acuity, a mod that gives increased damage and critical chance on weak points, mainly headshots. Beforehand, headshots were considered an afterthought, despite headshots giving a 300% increase in damage already, and players really only started considering going for them once these mods got introduced to the game. This isn't entirely the player's fault, for most of the mechanics in this game aren't properly explained, if at all, which is why the first half of this review did so you can actually learn what goes on behind the curtain, leading to players ranting about mechanics or game modes being too difficult to execute, despite them being piss easy by other game standards. And since DE is listening to the biggest creators and these types of players, it leads to nerfs and streamlining of mechanics or systems that were avoidable if DE had just properly explained them, leading the weapons and frames so self-sufficient that you have no reason to engage with these systems, for they quote-unquote slow down gameplay. The most damning example of this being the mighty white bar covering Eximus and every infested or void-stricken unit in the vicinity. Overguard. To understand why Overguard as a mechanic is so dangerous to the game's health, we must traverse time to the day it was first introduced. Update 31 was the Angels of the Zariman update that introduced the latest Warframe quest and location the Zariman 10-0. Updates in Warframe generally balance in-game systems with a release schedule that is quarterly. 2 times a year, Warframe gets a big update, generally adding in new story quests and multiple new locations, with 2 smaller updates released after these to add extra content not available at release, with additional smaller updates sprinkled in between for the new Warframes. Zariman, however, shook things up by introducing Overguard, a second health bar exclusive to mini-boss units known as Eximus. Simply put, Overguard disables crowd control effects on that unit until the Overguard is shot down. Overguard in this update and going forward was mostly balanced. Yes, crowd control effects were disabled, but these units only appeared at most 3 times in a single combat instance, meaning you could use crowd control effects to hold down the enemies that could be affected to give yourself breathing room to dispatch the Eximus. And given the old health type system was still in effect, it made it difficult to dispatch enemies fast enough, so it was important for survivability purposes, which it remained, until DE began introducing more and more Overguard units, and ones that even spread it to enemies in the vicinity. Then DE introduced frames that used or gave Overguard to the user, or upgrades such as the secondary Fortifier Arcane to increase damage to Overguard and steal it for ourselves. However, today, this festering white disease has sprouted the most dangerous and vile user of Overguard we have ever seen. the Ancient Protector. Let me begin by saying this. Fuck this enemy. Whoever designed this enemy should be fired and permanently removed from any game development for the rest of their existence. It is a design disaster and completely forgoes any sense of balance or reading for the player. How so, you may ask? Well, for starters, this enemy spreads Overguard to any enemy within its pulse range, of which it does 4 of these, granting 800% of its max health as Overguard, decaying over the course of 20 seconds. Second, this enemy can release a pulse even while under crowd control themselves. Third, more than one can spawn, and they can overlap their Overguard, keeping it from ever decaying properly, meaning they are nearly impossible to dispatch in a group if you don't run damage types like Magnetic or use the Fortifier Arcane upgrade mentioned previously. Oh, and the best part about this piece of crap is that it comes from the Infested faction. You know, a faction that is melee focused and swarms you. A faction you are supposed to crowd control! Making it impossible for crowd control heavy frames to deal without damage to offset it. And this doesn't just affect the crowd control characters either. Those part of the meta are also at risk, most notably a Warframe known as Sevagoth. Sevagoth is known as the JoJo frame, for he has an exalted Warframe kind of like a stand. However, for the purposes of this video, we're looking simply at his first 3 abilities and his passive. Sevagoth's passive. Upon being cut down, Sevagoth enters a tombstone form, unleashing his shadow to haunt the battlefield. This shadow charges forth upon the player's command. Should the shadow come into contact with an enemy, their soul is claimed. If 5 souls are claimed, Sevagoth is resurrected, only halting against overguarded units. I don't think I have to explain why this is important. Reap is Sevagoth's first ability, where upon consuming 25 energy, Sevagoth sends out his shadow. Enemies who come into contact with the shadow are afflicted by the Death's Harvest status effect, basically damage vulnerability, with it having a secondary effect, with Sevagoth's second ability, so. Sevagoth implants Death Seeds in the nearby enemies, dealing damage over time. However, if Reap comes into contact with a so target, they unleash an explosive, dealing 25% of a target's maximum HP in a 4-meter radius, meaning that to reach 100% damage against a target, you need 4 enemies clumped together to kill all 4. 100% is far less than 800%, meaning Overguard is left over very often, and if more than one protector is nearby, well yeah, good luck with that. And nothing can stop this without magnetic weaponry, not even Sevagoth's main means of crowd control, Gloom. Upon casting, Sevagoth produces a ring of void energy around him, slowly growing to its max range of 16 meters at base. Sevagoth heals himself upon damaging an enemy, and all enemies within the ring will drain energy per enemy affected until they are killed. Sevagoth is the most extreme example of this problem, but the point still stands. The Ancient Protector is an enemy that forces you into utilizing one status effect and one specific upgrade to properly counter them. Something new players are not going to have the knowledge to understand on the early star chart, of which you encounter them very early, Earth in fact. But Secondary Fortifier, a Pistol Arcane, is an item not acquirable until after the New War, but can't even be installed until you get a Secondary Arcane adapter, an item unobtainable until you have already beaten the game. Digital Extremes. Seriously, what the fuck were you thinking? Warframe, in all honesty, is in a very strange spot for me, and many other players right now. Between the content droughts for older players, the drastic reworks to enemies and mechanics that can kind of ruin the experience for new and experienced players alike, I honestly am unsure if I could recommend Warframe in its current state, especially with the Protector running around. But that kind of changed after they announced that the Protectors were being nerfed to a pre-1999 state, which made me realize, well, 1999 was a very different time. 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 they are listening to feedback. Now yes, this is just a microscopic problem in comparison to the other problems this game has. But the game is still fun. Despite the constant unnecessary nerfs to enemies, I have fun experimenting with what we do have. I have friends I love and can have fun with. There's a frame, this one goddamn frame, that keeps me from leaving the game for good. Yes, I am terrified and semi-unoptimistic for the future of this game. Yes, it has a multitude of issues, stemming from basic design to its player base. But I try my best to enjoy what's here and now. And if Limbo gets touch-ups that removes his identity, or kills his current kit completely, then I will finally know it's my time to head out the door. Should you play Warframe? Well, as cliche as it is to say, that's ultimately up to you. It is a grindy experience, but it is a game unlike any other, with something for everyone to enjoy. Warframe isn't just an MMO looter shooter, it is so much more if you give it your time. For time is the only currency that Warframe cares about. And on that bombshell, it is time for me to say goodbye. Thank you everyone for watching. If you liked what you saw, leave a like and comment telling me how I did. If you want to talk to me at all, check out my Discord link below. If you want to support me in my future endeavors and have early exclusive access to future projects, I suggest checking out my Patreon. It's special thanks to my creator friends, who gave me exclusive permission to feature them in this video. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you all next time. Have a wonderful day.